They say a courtroom is a place of truth, a place where justice is supposed to shine like a beacon in the darkness. But for one little black boy, standing barely tall enough to see over the wooden table, the courtroom was not just a place of judgment, it was the battlefield where he would fight for his mother's dignity, her freedom, and their very survival. Most people in that room thought it was a joke when he spoke. The judge tilted his glasses. Lawyers shuffled their papers. Spectators chuckled under their breath. But then, with a voice that carried both the innocence of childhood and the unshakable fire of a soul far older than his years, he declared, "Your Honor, I am my mom's lawyer." And in that moment, the world stopped. But to truly understand how a boy could come to such a moment, how the system could fail so much that a child would have to stand where adults should go back. Back to a neighborhood where dreams were buried beneath cracked sidewalks, and back to a woman who carried the weight of both love and injustice on her back. Her name was Danielle Rivers. To most, she was just another single black mother trying to make ends meet. To her son, she was the universe, the sun that rose every morning, and the anchor that kept them from being swept away by life's storms. Danielle had grown up on the south side of town, in a neighborhood where opportunity rarely knocked, and when it did, it didn't stay long. She knew struggle from the time she could spell the word, but what defined her wasn't her hardships, it was how she endured them. Every morning, Danielle woke before the sun, tying her hair back in a simple bun, pulling on the faded uniform of the diner she worked at. The fabric smelled faintly of coffee and grease, but to her son Malik, it smelled like love. Because he knew every dollar she earned in that diner was stretched beyond imagination to keep the lights on, to keep food in the fridge, and to keep him in school with his head held high. Malik was different. He wasn't just another kid running around the block, chasing a basketball or a bike. He was quiet, observant, the kind of child who noticed things others overlooked, the kind of child who would sit on the porch with a second-hand dictionary, underlining words while the other kids played tag. And Danielle noticed too. She saw the brilliance in her boy's eyes, the way his curiosity burned brighter than the street lamps that flickered at night. Sometimes, when she was bone-tired from a double shift, she would sneak into his room just to watch him sleep, whispering prayers over him. God, let him be more than this place, more than me. Let him carry something greater. But life, as it often does for those who already struggle, had a way of breaking the strongest backs. It started with a notice, a piece of paper slapped onto their front door, bold letters shouting a word that filled Danielle with dread: eviction. She had fallen behind on rent, not because she was reckless, but because one broken paycheck, one unexpected medical bill, and the fragile balance she had fought to keep had crumbled. The landlord, a man who drove a brand new truck and never once set foot in the apartments he owned, didn't care about her story. To him, she was just another late payment, another problem to clear out. But eviction wasn't the worst of it. Alongside it came an accusation that Danielle had intentionally withheld rent while still spending money irresponsibly. The landlord claimed she had been defrauding him. Lies, twisted to fit paperwork, backed by lawyers who saw her not as a mother, but as a target. She didn't have the money for an attorney. Public defenders were overworked, overwhelmed, and in cases like hers, rarely willing to fight tooth and nail. Danielle was cornered, and Malik saw it all. Most children, when they see their parents cry quietly at the kitchen table, try to hug them, try to cheer them up. Malik did that too. But he also did something else. He started listening. At night, when his mother fell asleep after long shifts, Malik would creep into the living room, pull out the eviction papers, and read them line by line. Words like plaintiff and defendant were strange, but he refused to let them scare him. He circled them, copied them into a notebook, and looked them up in that same old dictionary. He began to build his own understanding, piece by piece, like a puzzle no one expected him to solve. In school, while other kids were joking or daydreaming, Malik was memorizing terms, cross-examination, objection, evidence. His teachers noticed his new obsession with words, but they thought it was just a phase. Nobody knew he was preparing for a fight, because deep down, Malik had made a decision. If no one else would defend his mom, he would. The courtroom was packed that morning, It wasn't a high-profile case, but people always seemed to crowd when there was a chance to watch the poor fight the powerful. Danielle sat at the defense table, hands trembling, eyes downcast. The landlord's lawyer stood tall, polished in a suit that probably cost more than Danielle made in a month. His briefcase was stacked with papers. He smiled like victory was already his. The judge entered and everyone rose. The gavel hit the desk. The air grew heavy. Danielle tried to whisper to her son, "Malik, just sit quietly. Please, don't draw attention." But when the judge asked, "Who speaks for the defendant?" Danielle opened her mouth and froze. Her lips trembled. She didn't have the words. That's when Malik stood, slowly, steadily. His small hand rested on the table as he faced the judge. His heart pounded in his chest, but his voice, though high-pitched with youth, carried a clarity that silenced the murmurs. "Your Honor, I am my mom's lawyer." Gasps rippled across the courtroom. The landlord's attorney laughed. "This is absurd." The judge squinted, adjusting his glasses. "Son, this isn't a game. Where is your mother's counsel?" Malik swallowed hard, then lifted the notebook he had filled with weeks of midnight study, pages of definitions, copied laws, and scribbled arguments. "I may not wear a suit, I may not have a degree, but I've studied every word they wrote about my mom, and I can prove she's not what they're saying she is." The room went silent, and for the first time, Danielle lifted her eyes not in defeat, but in awe. Her little boy, barely 12 years old, was about to fight a battle most grown men would run from. The gavel echoed in the silent room. It was the sound of authority, of judgment, of centuries of law distilled into a single strike. But for Malik, it was the sound of a door opening, a door he never should have had to walk through, but one he had chosen nonetheless. "Proceed," the judge had said. And with that word, Malik was thrust into a battle far larger than himself. He took a deep breath, gripping his spiral notebook so tightly his knuckles turned white. His palms were sweaty, his knees trembling, but inside his chest beat a heart that would not surrender. The opposing attorney leaned against the polished wooden table, smirking at the boy. His voice dripped with condescension. "Young man, perhaps you think this is some kind of school debate, but law is not a game. Your mother is facing eviction and fraud charges. These are serious matters, not child's play." Malik swallowed hard, then looked the man directly in the eye. His voice shook for only a second before steadying. "I know it's not a game. I live what you're talking about. I know what it feels like to come home to broken heat in the winter, to see my mom cry over bills. This isn't just paper, it's our life." The attorney blinked, caught off guard by the raw honesty. But he quickly regained his composure. "That may be so, but you cannot possibly understand legal procedure." Malik opened his notebook, flipping to a page filled with messy handwriting and underlined terms. "I understand enough to know my mom has rights. I understand enough to know you can't call her a fraud without proving anything. And I understand enough to ask questions you don't want to answer." The room buzzed with whispers. The boy wasn't backing down. As Malik spoke, Danielle sat frozen, her mind flashing back to nights she thought he was sleeping. She remembered how she would come home late, exhausted from double shifts, and find the glow of a lamp under his bedroom door. She thought he was sneaking comic books. But no, when she peeked in once, she saw him hunched over papers, whispering words like defendant, cross-examination, evidence. At the time, she had scolded him gently. "Baby, you need to sleep. You'll wear yourself out." He had looked up at her with wide, determined eyes and said, "Mama, I just want to understand. If they ever come for us, I want to know what to say." Now, sitting in court, Danielle realized he had been preparing for this very moment all along. The opposing attorney strutted to the front of the courtroom, shuffling his papers. His voice was confident, polished. "Your Honor, the facts are simple. Miss Rivers has repeatedly failed to pay rent. Despite ample warnings, she continued to occupy the apartment without fulfilling her financial obligations. Furthermore, we have reason to believe she misallocated funds, choosing to spend on luxuries rather than responsibilities. The plaintiff seeks eviction and compensation for damages." He spoke smoothly, like a man who had given this speech 100 times. He pointed to charts and waved receipts. To most, it sounded airtight, but Malik was listening carefully. Every word, every pause, every assumption, he stored them like arrows in a quiver. When the lawyer finished, Malik stood. His small frame looked even smaller next to the tall desk, but his presence filled the room. "Your Honor," he began, "may I ask the plaintiff a few questions?" The judge raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Proceed." Malik turned to the landlord, a heavy-set man with slick hair and expensive shoes. "Sir, you claim my mom spent money on luxuries instead of rent. Do you have proof of these luxuries?" The landlord frowned. "Well, she didn't pay. That's proof enough." "No, sir," Malik said firmly, his child's voice carrying a surprising sharpness. "Not paying isn't proof of buying luxuries. Did you see her buying fancy clothes, expensive jewelry? Did you see her going on trips? Do you have receipts, pictures, anything?" The landlord shifted uncomfortably. "No, but," Malik cut in, "then you don't know. For all you know, she was using that money to buy groceries, to pay hospital bills, take care of me." The judge's gavel tapped once. "Answer the question directly, Mr. Peterson. Do you have evidence?" The landlord's face reddened. "No." The crowd murmured louder. Malik pressed further. "Isn't it also true, sir, that the heat in our building was broken for 3 months last winter?" "That's irrelevant," the landlord snapped. "Actually," Malik replied, "tenant rights say landlords must provide safe and livable housing. No heat in the winter isn't safe, is it?" The lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him. "Answer the boy," the landlord stammered. "There were delays in repairs." "Delays," Malik tilted his head. "So families had to pay rent even while their kids slept in coats and shivered at night? Does that sound fair to you, sir?" The landlord's lips tightened. He had no answer. At first, people had come expecting a circus, a child pretending to be a lawyer. But now the atmosphere has shifted. Spectators leaned forward, jaws clenched, eyes wide. This wasn't just a boy. This was a voice too long silenced, finding power in the very place designed to silence people like him. And Danielle? She couldn't stop the tears rolling down her cheeks. She had come expecting humiliation. Instead, her son was giving her dignity. The judge cleared his throat. "Young man, what is your name?" "Malik Rivers, sir." "And how old are you, Malik?" 12. 12, the judge repeated softly, shaking his head. "And yet you've come prepared with questions, arguments, even citations of tenant law. How did you learn these things?" Malik held up his battered notebook. "From the library, from listening to cases, from watching people try to talk down to my mom. I had to learn, Your Honor, because if I didn't, nobody else would help her." A hush fell over the courtroom. Even the opposing lawyer seemed rattled, fidgeting with his tie. The judge leaned back, studying Malik for a long moment. Then, with a faint smile tugging at his lips, he said, "Proceed." And so, Malik did. The lawyer's smirk was gone. The landlord shifted uncomfortably. And the boy who wasn't supposed to matter, who wasn't supposed to speak, was suddenly the loudest voice in the room. But Malik wasn't finished. He had studied too long, prepared too hard, and seen his mother suffer too deeply to stop now. "Your Honor," Malik said softly, flipping through his notebook, "may I present something?" The judge nodded. From his backpack, Malik pulled out a bundle of photographs. Grainy, slightly bent, but clear enough. He walked them over to the clerk with hands that trembled not from fear, but from determination. "These are pictures I took in our apartment, sir. That's the ceiling in our bathroom. The black mold has been there for over a year. That's the broken radiator. And this one." His voice cracked as he pointed. "This is the water we drink when the taps don't run brown." Gasps echoed in the room. The judge's eyes narrowed as he studied the photographs. The opposing attorney sprang to his feet. "Objection. These photographs were not formally submitted into evidence." The judge silenced him with a glare. "Sit down, counselor. The court will accept them for review." Malik pressed on. "My mom reported these things. She called, she begged, she even wrote letters. But nothing changed. The landlord still took our money. And now, he says she's a fraud? How can that be true when he didn't even keep his promises as a landlord?" The landlord's face flushed. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering furiously. But Malik wasn't done. He looked directly at him. "Mr. Peterson, you said my mom owes you money. But isn't it true you got government grants for building repairs? Isn't it true you were paid already?" The landlord froze. His lawyer jumped up. "Your Honor, this boy is speculating," but Malik cut him off. "I saw it. In the newspaper. Our building was listed in a city report. You took money meant to fix apartments, but nothing was fixed. Where did it go?" The courtroom buzzed with shock. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Peterson, Is this true? The landlord stammered. I don't recall. Answer the question, the judge pressed. The landlord's lawyer tried to intervene again, but the damage was done. Everyone in that room could see it. The boy wasn't just fighting eviction. He was exposing something much larger. For the first time in hours, Danielle found her strength. She stood, her voice trembling but clear. Your Honor, I may not know the law like these men do, but I know what it feels like to work every day and still be treated like nothing. I know what it feels like to beg for heat in the winter while my son sleeps under 3 blankets. I know what it feels like to cry in secret because I can't protect him from the world. And now I know what it feels like to watch my son fight for me when no one else would. Tears ran down her cheeks. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge's eyes glistened. Malik reached for her hand. Together, they stood not as a poor tenant and her child, but as a family refusing to be broken. The judge cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. Mr. Peterson, I will ask again. Did you or did you not receive funding for repairs to this property? The landlord mumbled. Yes, but the costs, they were higher than expected. Malik raised his notebook. Then why didn't you fix anything? Why is the mold still there? Why is the heat still broken? Why is the water still dirty? The landlord had no answer. And in that silence, the truth spoke louder than words. Spectators whispered among themselves. Some shook their heads in disgust at the landlord. Others looked at Malik with awe. A boy just 12 years old had revealed what adults either ignored or were too afraid to say. One woman in the back, an older tenant from the same building, stood suddenly. He's telling the truth, she cried. My apartment is the same way. We've been complaining for years. Another man stood too. Mine too. This landlord doesn't fix anything. Just take our money. The courtroom broke into chaos. Tenants shouting, lawyers scrambling, the landlord shouting back. The judge slammed his gavel. Order! Order in the court! But the damage was done. This was no longer just Danielle's case. It was a mirror held up to an entire system of neglect and exploitation. When the room finally quieted, Malik stood again. His voice was small but unwavering. Your Honor, I'm just a kid. I don't know all the big words these men use, but I know right from wrong, and I know the law is supposed to protect people, not hurt them. My mom isn't a criminal. She's a hero. She works harder than anyone I know. If she failed to pay sometimes, it's because she was choosing between rent and me. Isn't that what a mother is supposed to do? Choose her child? The judge said nothing at first. He only stared at Malik with an expression no one could read. Finally, he whispered, Court will recess until tomorrow morning. The gavel struck. The day was done. As they walked out, Danielle's legs felt weak. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones stretched toward Malik. Son, where did you learn all this? Do you realize what you've done? Are you afraid? But Malik said nothing. He only held his mother's hand tightly, guiding her past the crowd. That night, in their apartment, they sat together on the couch. Danielle stroked his hair. Baby, I don't know how you did that, but you did. You gave me back my voice. Malik smiled faintly. You gave me mine first, Mama. I just borrowed yours for today. The next morning, the courthouse felt different. The air was heavy with anticipation. Word had spread quickly about the little boy who stood as his mother's lawyer. People from the neighborhood came to watch. Reporters packed the benches. Even a few city officials sat in the back, curious to see if this was just a sensational story or the beginning of something bigger. Danielle held Malik's hand tightly as they walked in. She tried to be strong, but he could feel the tremor in her grip. He squeezed back. It's okay, Mama. We got this. When the judge entered and the gavel struck, the room fell silent. Court is now in session. We continue with the case of Peterson versus Rivers, the judge announced. But his eyes lingered on Malik. Young man, are you ready to proceed? Malik stood, clutching his notebook. Yes, Your Honor. The opposing attorney rose first, trying to regain control. He thundered about contracts, obligations, and the sanctity of agreements. He painted Danielle as a tenant who took advantage of generosity. His words rolled like polished stones, smooth but hollow. But when it was Malik's turn, his questions cut sharper than any lawyer's speech. Mr. Peterson, he asked the landlord, how many apartments do you own? The landlord hesitated. Dozens. And how many of them are in the same condition as ours? That's irrelevant. No, sir. Malik interrupted, his voice steady. "It matters. Because yesterday other tenants stood up. They said their homes are broken too. That means it's not just about us, it's about all of them." The crowd murmured in agreement. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Peterson, answer the boy." The landlord wiped his forehead. Some properties have maintenance issues." Malik flipped to another page in his notebook. "Your Honor, may I show something else?" The judge nodded. Malik held up copies of a city report he had found at the library. "This report lists grants given to landlords for building repairs. Mr. Peterson's company is here. They received money last year to fix heating and water systems, but nothing was fixed. Where did that money go?" The courtroom gasped. The landlord's lawyer shouted, "Objection!" but the judge slammed the gavel. "Overruled. This is highly relevant. Mr. Peterson, answer the question." The landlord stuttered. "The funds, they were redirected." "Redirected where?" Malik demanded. No answer came. Just silence, and silence said enough. The judge turned toward Malik. "You've done remarkable work here, son. But law requires more than passion. It requires evidence. Do you have more?" Malik looked down at his notebook, then up at his mother. He nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I don't just have pictures and reports. I have witnesses." The doors opened. Neighbors' other tenants filed in. They had come to testify, emboldened by Malik's courage. One by one, they spoke of broken heat, leaking ceilings, unsafe wiring, children coughing from mold. The landlord's lawyer grew pale. His carefully constructed wall of lies was crumbling, brick by brick. Finally, after hours of testimony, the judge called for closing statements. The lawyer went first, clinging to legal jargon and technicalities. But the words no longer carried weight. The room no longer believed him. Then Malik rose. He was small, his shoes scuffed, his notebook bent, but his voice carried the strength of generations. "Your Honor," he began, "I know I'm not supposed to be here. I know I don't have a law degree. I'm just 12. But I also know what justice feels like. And this, what they're trying to do to my mom, isn't justice. They want to make us look like criminals. But the real crime is letting families live in broken homes while charging them money. The real crime is calling my mom irresponsible when all she did was choose between paying rent and keeping me alive. I read that the law is supposed to protect the vulnerable. Well, we are vulnerable, and all we ask is to be treated with dignity." He paused, his eyes filling with tears. His voice wavered, but he didn't stop. "Your Honor, if you evict my mom, you're not just punishing her, you're punishing me. You're telling every kid like me that no matter how hard we work, no matter how much we believe in justice, the system will never believe in us. But if you give us a chance, if you see the truth, maybe things can be different. Not just for us, but for everyone in buildings like ours. Please, Your Honor, don't let them take my mom away." The room was silent, dead silent. Some wiped their eyes. Even the judge seemed to struggle to steady his breathing. The judge raised his gavel slowly. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of mountains. "This court finds in favor of the defendant, Ms. Rivers. The eviction is denied. Charges of fraud are dismissed. Furthermore, this court refers the plaintiff, Mr. Peterson, and his company to the district attorney's office for investigation of housing fraud and misuse of government funds." The gavel struck. Boom. Danielle gasped, covering her face with her hands as tears poured. Malik threw his arms around her. The courtroom erupted with cheers, claps, shouts of relief. But through it all, Malik held only one person, his mother. His victory was hers. News spread beyond their neighborhood. A child lawyer, a boy who exposed corruption. Reporters ran the story on front pages. Activists pointed to it as proof of systemic failure. City officials scrambled to review other landlords. For Danielle, life didn't suddenly become easy. She still worked long hours, bills still came. But something had changed. The shame she once carried was gone. The world now knew her truth. For Malik, the trial was just the beginning. Teachers noticed his brilliance. Lawyers reached out, offering mentorship. Scholarships whispered on the horizon. But for him, it wasn't about the future yet. It was about that day, the day he proved that love can be louder than lies, and courage can come from the smallest voices. One evening, Danielle sat on their porch with Malik, the sun setting behind them. She whispered, "You saved me." Malik leaned against her shoulder. "You saved me first, Mama. I just made sure they finally listened. They say justice is blind, but too often it sees wealth, power, and privilege before it ever sees truth. Yet on that day, in that courtroom, justice looked into the eyes of a little black boy and found its voice again. This story is not just about a child lawyer. It is about love that refuses to bow, courage that refuses to be silenced, and the reminder that even in the darkest rooms of power, truth can rise. If this story of how a boy's unshakable courage saved his mother and unmasked corruption touched your heart, then join us. Subscribe to Colorless Voices, where the voiceless are never silent, where every story reminds us that even the smallest voices can echo the loudest truths. Because sometimes all it takes is one child to remind the world what justice really means.